Well, thank you everyone for coming. My name is Alex Cornell-DeHue. I'm the president of Elected Officials to Protect America. And we really appreciate our esteemed panelists here for taking the time coming really across the nation to join us today for our climate emergency and energy security press conference. This will be the first event of our conference where we'll be at the Department of Energy with elected officials, over 450 elected officials, clean energy leaders, clean energy CEOs and companies who are the solutions, as well as clean energy investors. We'll be talking about solutions to the climate crisis and how we improve our energy security. So today we're really focusing on a really unique day, right? The Inflation Reduction Act is being passed and will be signed today, most likely. So excited. This really is a historic leadership of fostering that bill through for over 2 years of work. And EOPA has been working tirelessly to get the components in this legislation through, particularly $369 billion in clean energy, which is aimed at reducing our carbon emissions by 40% by 2030. That's a huge accomplishment because it gets us 10% there of what we need, and that's the gap by 2030. So we're on our way, and it's very possible to do it if we continue this momentum. The other part is the clean transportation. It's going healthcare. We shouldn't forget that it's going to help a lot of people in their healthcare. And when we get down the panel, we're going to talk about particularly how it ties into Justice 40 and other components of the administration's and environmental justice priorities. But I want to touch about a little bit on the clean energy component and why it's so important for our national security. For instance, when I was deployed with the Marine Corps in Iraq, it was about dusk and the sun was just setting. It's very hazy. We came across a line of cars, trucks, and tractors, really as far as the eye could see. And then the closer we got, I realized they're in line because they were waiting to get gas and oil for their vehicles. And of course, there's a curfew, and we're in charge of enforcing that curfew. And the very unfortunate thing is that they were willing to put their lives at risk to rebel against us because they needed that single source of energy so desperately. And the unfortunate thing is, many years later, in an oddly similar and very unfortunate way, we are lined up to autocratic nations for that oil. We're lined up to Putin because we need the oil and gas that he has worldwide. And this is a serious security threat, right? And so how do we mitigate that, right? Well, the answer is actually here. We have all the technology. It just needs to be scaled. And this is why this act is historic in being able to do that. There's still work to do, but it is an amazing step forward. So when we have all our veterans who have experienced this firsthand and seen the dangers and solutions firsthand, we'd like to bring everyone together and share and hear from their experiences. Starting with Representative Debbie Sierra. She is the co-director of our Leadership Council, as well as an Air Force veteran.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, everyone. Again, I am New Mexico State Representative Debbie Sariñana, and I'm very excited to be here today. As proud veterans who served as elected officials, we've gathered from across the country, like Alex said, to congressional leaders and President Biden for the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. It's a critical historical step for inflation, our nation's security, and the health of our planet. And I'm coming from New Mexico, where we have 40% of our budget is from fossil fuels. So this is I am so much into this. And as a teacher, where pollution is really affecting everything that goes on in our schools. The IRA will be transformative with $369 billion of various tax credits and measures that will help stimulate adoption of clean energy technologies. It will make the largest ever American investment in climate, justice, clean energy, jobs, and lower consumer costs while supporting critical programs to improve the health and well-being of American families. It will help slash climate pollution in the U.S. by an estimated 40% by the end of the decade. However, the goal scientists say is necessary to prevent the worst impact of climate change is a 50% reduction in carbon pollution by 2030. And that will be repeated and repeated because that's something we have to get through to everyone. But so we know more has to be done. The need to transition off fossil fuels has never been more urgent. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said the world will suffer mass migration and conflicts caused by scarcity of resources due to the climate crisis if countries around the globe don't accelerate the transition to the use of clean energy. Our lives, economy, and national security depend on us meeting the existential threat of the climate crisis. We must seek energy independence from the fossil fuels. And again, coming from New Mexico, this is something we push, but moving away from it is really difficult, but we're working on it. The last time I was honored to be in Washington, D.C. with the elected official to protect America, we fought for funding to secure the Land and Water Conservation Act. Then and now, fellow lawmakers who served in our military, we're here to make sure Congress understood how important our public lands are to who we are as a nation. We were successful in our mission then, and I hope that we will be successful in our mission today. Unfortunately, because the only way to pass the Inflation Reduction Act was to compromise, there's provisions that give fossil fuel polluters new gas and oil leases, and New Mexico will be affected by this heavily, and it's egregious. Specifically, the IRA will require the Interior Department to offer at least 2 million acres of public land and 60 million acres of offshore water for oil and gas leases each year for a decade, as a prerequisite to installing all new solar and wind energy. If the department fails to offer these minimum amounts for leasing, no right of way could be granted for any utility scale renewable energy project on public lands or waters. And in New Mexico, we are moving on utility, on water and solar. Transmissions lines is something we need to add, but this will greatly affect us if we can't, if it's not done. I understand the president and many members of Congress were against the provision. A key way President Biden could help immediately would be to make national climate emergency declaration, which would unleash his presidential powers to reach a 50% greenhouse gas emission reduction by 2030 to combat existential national security threat of the climate crisis. The cost of inaction in climate is too high and increasing every second we delay. The last 7 years were the hottest on record. This spring, New Mexico suffered the worst fires on record, with 900,000 acres burned. The Colorado River is drying up. We're in the midst of an unprecedented 20-year drought with no end in sight. The only way to mitigate the spiraling chain of disasters is to meet the goal of reducing fossil fuels' deadly emission by 50% by 2030. This year, prices at the pump have skyrocketed, showing exactly why we will never drill our way to a true energy security. Fossil fuels are globally traded commodities, which leaves the United States economy dangerously exposed to the volatility of energy prices. And this hits New Mexico really hard because 40% of our budget comes from fossil fuels. So we are in a up and down all the time with our budget. Meanwhile, the second quarter oil industry reports show that they raked in 114 billion in record profits, to 63 billion of that going to executives and shareholders, while we, the people, suffered. Yet fossil fuel companies continue to get taxpayer funds. And in 2020, coal, oil, and natural gas companies received 5.9 trillion in subsidies. Our president and congressional leaders are aware of these discrepancies, and many of them are trying to right these wrongs. They know the transportation sector is the #1 contributor to climate change. Not only does vehicle pollution accelerate climate change, it also contributes to health conditions caused by poor quality air and poses major risks to public health and premature death, especially in low-income and communities of color located near fossil fuel refineries and heavily trafficked roads. I have 3 schools in my district that run along a very busy freeway. And as a former teacher, I know the health hazard is very real to the thousands of kids who sit in those classrooms. The IRA gives consumers a game-changing tax credit to buy any electric vehicle or fuel cell vehicle, new or used, and tax credits of up to $7,500 if those vehicles are made in America. There are also rebates to buy new and efficient appliances to weatherize homes and tax credits for heat pumps and rooftop solar. It's a major step to energy independence. The Inflation Reduction Act does have the power to make alternative energies the way of the future and diminish our dependency on fossil fuel. Again, we want to thank congressional leaders and President Biden for the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, but we need the president to make a national emergency climate declaration so that we can meet the goals of 50% reduction in fossil fuel emissions by 2030 to save our planet. The only way to pave the road to peace and prosperity is to reduce and eventually eliminate our dependence on fossil fuels. Thank you.
Next, we have President Fawn Sharp. She's the president of the Native American Caucus at Congress.
Great, thank you. Thank you, EOPA, as well as President Biden, members of Congress, for this historic piece of legislation. My name is Fawn Sharp, and I do serve as the president of the National Congress of American Indians, the oldest and largest representative body of tribal nations in the United States, representing more than 574 sovereign nations. You know, our ancestors long foretold of a day of reckoning. Many of our ancestors predicted there would come a time when the planet and the trajectory that we were on was not sustainable. And that day of reckoning has arrived. That day of reckoning is now. And I really want to touch on something that Alex said, that while we face an apocalyptic challenge on a global scale, the solution to this challenge lies within us. And I would like to add not only the solution with respect to the innovation, all of the work that we've been doing for decades, but I would also urge those to look at what has been here for centuries, that old traditional ecological knowledge that our ancestors practiced through centuries. So when you look at what we possess here in the United States, we possess the full spectrum, historical knowledge and wisdom in renewable energy and innovation that's on the horizon. So collectively, we have centuries of knowledge right here at our fingertips. This generation has it. We have to be smart. We have to be strategic in taking the resources as well as the investments that we have to come together. No one is immune from climate change. We are all deeply impacted, and everyone that's represented at this table, as well as through the EOPA, has it. And so I am just truly honored and deeply committed to continue to stand with our relatives all across this country. And I want to add, tribal nations have been significantly a part of the global community. There are over 100 million indigenous peoples around the world, and the world recognizes that we are disproportionately impacted, and we are on the front lines, and we have little to no resources. And so it's going to be our goal and mission to attract foreign investment, foreign innovation, to partner with tribal nations to attract investment that otherwise wouldn't even come to the United States. And so those are some of the things that we see with the opportunities here. And it's at that point in time when we have no choice. We have to declare a state of national emergency. We are running out of time, and we have to deploy all of the resources, all of the states, all of the federal agencies toward one common goal and vision. We share that vision, but we have to be very specific and strategic, inclusive, and rise above all of the division, rise above all of the noise and static around climate change, and find leaders all across this country, whether you're an elected official, you're from the faith-based communities, you're from colleges and universities, academics, youth. I want to touch on the youth activism. When you see what happened at Standing Rock with the Dakota Access Pipeline, that was our Native youth rising. And we have to find ways, because our generation clearly has a vision and we're making the plans, but ultimately it's going to be that next generation that implements and executes much of the work that we are doing. So I encourage everyone to bring our youth along, and they have a lot to say, they have a lot of passion and a lot of energy. And my final point that I want to make is we have to hold the fossil fuel industry accountable. We are doing all of this work, to clean up decades of disaster, decades of environmental genocide, and they must be held accountable. We're going to do the work going forward, but let's not forget what they've done in the past and hold them accountable with atmospheric litigation or other ways in which we can sue them, secure the resources that are necessary, and make that investment. This should not fall all entirely on the public, whether it's paying for it, paying them subsidies. They must finally pay going forward. And that's what we are also committed to, ensuring that There's some environmental justice along the way. Thank you.
Cool. Next, we have Supervisor Mike Turner, and he is an Air Force veteran and also a member of the EOPA Leadership Council.
Well, thank you very much, X. And my compliments to President Biden and the members of Congress that voted for the IRA. I think it's an enormous achievement. It's a historic achievement, and one that I think all those who voted for it can be very, very proud of. I come from Loudoun County. If you've ever landed at Dulles Airport, you're in Loudoun County. We have a unique situation in Loudoun County, and you'll hear a theme as I go through the conference here. I truly believe that while the IRA and similar measures are absolutely vital, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act that passed in November, absolutely critical to the future, to the climate future of this country and of the world, I absolutely believe that local governments and local communities are going to solve the problem. It's going to happen at the local level. Loudoun County has a unique challenge. I sit on a 9-person board of supervisors. We're the highest elected body at the county level, and I'm the Ashburn supervisor. Data Center Alley is in the middle of Ashburn. We have 150 data centers in Loudoun County. Dominion Energy just said during a briefing, and I'll mention it later in the conference, that the Dominion market in Northern Virginia and principally Loudoun County is larger than the next 5 Dominion electricity markets in the United States combined. We have 26 million square feet of data centers generating, I believe the number is, don't quote me on this, I'm at a press conference, why would you quote me? But I believe it's 6 gigawatts of power usage from Dominion. Dominion has made serious commitments to sustainable energy by 2030. They just announced 3 weeks ago, I'm the chair of the Transportation and Land Use Committee, and I instituted a discussion on what is the future of data centers in the county. Where are they going to be built? Does the county board of supervisors have some control? Can they build by right? Do they need legislative approval? And in the course of that series of 3 discussions, suddenly the data center community and Dominion Energy started putting it all together holistically. And they made an announcement 3 weeks ago. Dominion said to the data center community, if you do not have an existing signed electricity service agreement, we will not be able to provide any more electricity to data centers for the next 3 years. Out of the blue, no more electricity for data centers for the next 3 years. That is billions of dollars of projects that have gone on hold because of consumption of principally fossil fuel energy. I'm a retired Air Force. To give you 2 instances of energy and how it impacts national security and why it's so important. My first assignment was flying air rescue helicopters out of Thule, Greenland, right on the Greenland ice cap. I saw a show that now the Greenland ice cap, so you know, is 2 miles high. At the center of the ice cap, it's 2 miles thick of ice. The area underneath the ice has never been seen by the eyes of man. That's how thick it is. I just saw a show on CNN 3 or 4 days ago that said that the Greenland ice cap is melting 4 times faster than they originally thought it was melting. There are now sections of the underlying tundra that are exposed to sunlight for the first time in human history. That's how fast it's melting. Fast forward to just prior to Desert Storm, I was in the skiff at Central Command. And I don't know if any of you remember it, but there was actually an incident with oil tankers in the Persian Gulf right before Desert Storm broke out. And I remember having a discussion in the skiff, and they said, we better be careful. If Saddam Hussein gets control of the oil supplies in Kuwait, we could be looking at prices for oil of $25 a barrel. And we went to war. We went to war shortly thereafter. And we've seen the impact of oil shortages generated by the Ukraine war. And we've seen, frankly, the profits that the oil companies have been able to generate as a result of that war, which is, I think, some real, but largely perception. There is a perception of a shortage, and that's an excuse to raise prices. It is absolutely a national security crisis. We need to declare a national emergency for climate change. It is happening faster than we can imagine. I just came back from Phoenix, where I was visiting my daughter. They have a serious water shortage in the entire Western United States. So there are clear national security implications here. But once again, I come right back around to my original statement. The bills are wonderful, but we're going to have to change this at the local level. We have to change at the county level. That's where the change is going to be permanent. Okay.
Thank you. And also in the implementation, that's where the implementation, where all the funding's coming in, will be at the local level. And so it's unbelievably important that local and state electeds join us in this. But speaking of local and state and tribal, we have tribal member Philip Williams, who is also an Army veteran.
Yanakoi. Good morning in my language.
Good morning.
I'm Philip Williams from the Yurok tribe of Northern California. We are the largest tribe in California. I also want to thank EOPA for giving me this platform to speak, to let our voice be heard. I'll also want to thank President Biden's efforts in the Inflation Reduction Act. It's unprecedented. He's mentioned tribes many times through his term, and we are very thankful that there's a president and a leader that acknowledges tribal voices. A little about the Yurok people. You know, we have lived in this landscape since the beginning of time. In our oral traditions, we were taught by the Creator to live in this landscape. The Wagays, the people that glow, taught us how to live, taught us how to manage our resources. They taught us that we have a symbiotic relationship with every living organism in our landscape. We know that. But there's been devastation done to our environment, starting with the gold rush of 1849, where gold was extracted with unregulated techniques. Whole mountains were taken down in a matter of days, which impacted our salmon, which is our lifeblood that sustains our people. Logging practices, clear-cut logging that depleted our ancient redwood trees. Trees at the base of are as big as this room and a quarter-mile high. Can you imagine how much air that would have cleaned today if we still had those trees right now? We know this. The third was the dam systems that were put in on our river. They choked off our river, which hurt our salmon. Now the temperatures of the river are not habitable for the Chinook salmon and all the animals that depend on that river system. We have had 3 fish kills in 20 years, which has never happened before. Bacteria, no oxygen. That has hurt our communities. We have nothing to sustain ourselves. We don't have an economy because of the devastation of the environment. We're a natural resources tribe. This is our religion. This is how we live. I'm thankful for organizations like EOPA to pursue climate change. They're aligned with our beliefs and our systems. But it's not enough. The Inflation Reduction Act is not enough for tribes. We need more. And it needs to be an easier system. The funding that's coming down, we just streamline the mechanisms to make it easier for tribes to access this. We've been doing this work before the awareness of climate change. Our duty is to restore our environment. We've made a big investment in our salmon restoration projects. We've done condor reintroduction. We're reviving all the animals that we've been in charge of. We need to stop making the red tape so difficult for tribes. We don't have the resources for matching funds for grants. We need direct funding that comes right to tribes. We can't have the red tape where every level of government is taking a chunk, where it finally gets down to us. We barely have enough to implement what we need to save our environment. This is very emotional. Think about my people suffering. You know, there's no economy there. It's time that we look at tribes, recognize us as people. This is the 21st century. We have every knowledge to restore our environment, traditional ecological knowledge. We are leading the traditional ecological knowledge with cultural fire right now. We manage our forests with cultural fire. What's significant about cultural fire is when we look back on history, when first contact came to our land, our landscape was on fire. And the Europeans didn't understand that. They thought we were just burning down the land. But this is how we maintained our forests for the animals, for the elk, for the deer, for all the squirrels. This is how we maintained it. There's a small group of people, and I hope you will join me, that tap into what we already know. We can teach these management practices to you. We can heal this land with what we already know. I'd like to thank you guys for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. Next, we'd like to hear from Mayor Derek Wood. It's a town you go to, not through.
Marine Corps veteran. I was
Oh, of
waiting for him to
course.
say that.
Hoorah. Well, we got outnumbered by the Air Force and Army, so actually almost.
I was waiting for the military reference. Mayor Derek Wood, town of Dumfries, Virginia. We consider ourselves the southeast gateway into DC. We're about 25 miles south from here. Grateful for what Congress and the president has done in passing not only this, well, not passing, but hopefully passing today, this Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the Build Back a Better America, because I think the two of them do work very hand in hand. Grateful for Alex and his leadership and elected officials protecting America for, really taking a lead role and really being a voice in bringing together people of all demographics, from elected officials to organizations that's important, to really lead this charge and making sure that we all have a voice, and our voices collectively are coming together to make a difference up here in Washington and on every single level of government. So thank you, Alex, for what you're doing to continue to bring us together. This environmental stuff has been important to my town and my community because it has impacted us. Even prior to the flood of 1812, Dumfries is what we call the oldest continuously chartered town in the state of Virginia, meaning we were established on a body of water. And I definitely felt his remarks and comments about how this environment on these issues. We were built on a deep water port called Quantico Creek, which led out to the Potomac. We actually had a port that rivaled New York, it rivaled Boston, it rivaled Philadelphia as the amount of goods and services that left. But prior to that flood of 1812, we lost our deep water because of a lot of environmental issues, poor farming. They didn't have the resources there. And it impacted us on a standpoint where we became an economic desert, right? So everybody began to migrate and leave that community for years. And then they brought in coal mines, and then they brought in coal ash into the town of Dublin. So right there on the Potomac River sits 3 or 4 coal ash ponds, right, that they had to remove and consolidate. And it's a big issue now in Dumfries with where are they going to do with this coal ash? Are we going to take the coal ash and, well, the law states that they have to take the coal ash out the ponds and put it on a landfill. They can build a landfill on place, or they can put it on trucks or trains and they can move it out, which is really unacceptable to our community, because now we begin to repollute that environment. Also, we look at the issues that's not only impacting us, but that's impacting everybody across the nation. Just this week, we saw flash floods. I don't know if your community's seen it, but we had 2 major storms that were competing, and we know this is all environmental. And they just
no water in California.
Yeah, So in Vegas they're having floods, and in Virginia we're having major floods that's just coming up and down, which is causing an issue. We also saw major droughts and heat as a result. And then earlier this year we saw a major snowstorm that dropped almost a foot of snow in less than an hour that shut down Interstate 95, which was a major impact. We had a sitting a U.S. Senator, Tim Kaine, who was stuck in traffic himself for almost 24 hours because of this. And so you see all of this that's happening. And what we see in the bill is $60 million worth of investment into underserved communities that they can do. But it has to happen on a local level. And I'm glad that you made the statement that a lot of this money, we have to apply for grants and they're matching grants. We've been working on Quantico Creek for major years. We put millions of dollars, which we can't raise on our own. We need the grants to be able to build this body of water. Had we not put the $1.5 million that we've already invested in half of the creek that's in our town, this week's floods that happened on Wednesday would have been probably drastic for that community. I'm already getting calls and emails from people in my community who wants me to come look at their garages and their basement because they had those major water issues. And so this Inflation Reduction Act, it's a start, right? It's a start. It's something that we can put on it. Is it enough? Absolutely not. There is absolutely more that can get done. And it's going to take each and every one of us being a voice, getting involved, letting other people know your story and what's going on in your community. And I think one of the lessons that we learned as Marines is that, not only are we in charge of our job, but we're all leaders, that we all have to take responsibility and find solutions and become the solution to our own problems. And that's why I guess I raised my hand to serve, to be the solution or the change I want to see. And thank you.
Great. Looking forward to seeing all the solutions coming out to the town. We'll
Don't drive through, but you drive to. No longer economic destiny.
We promise we get his catchphrase in there. All right, next we have Council Member Gary Schlack. He is an Army veteran and he's going to round it out and then we'll take some questions.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Alex, and the EOPA, and thank you to President Biden and members of Congress that really worked hard to pass the Inflation Reduction Act. I'm a veteran, Army veteran, environmentalist, father of 2 boys, husband to my beautiful wife, Bridget, and member of my local city council in Allen Park, Michigan. The city known as one of the world's largest tire, ironically, and the Detroit Lions. Climate change is real. Our world climate is complex. It's no doubt that there will always be uncertainty in understanding such a large system as it is. Yet the evidence continually shows significant changes to our world is happening. The evidence comes from measures of rising air temperatures, ocean temperatures, increasing sea levels, and other changes that we can physically see. We know these changes are likely attributed to human activity. We also know that we live in the world's largest, wealthiest nation in the world, and therefore we have a global responsibility where we must be aware of the interconnectivity and interdependence of the world. More so, we have an American responsibility. We can't afford to ignore Americans' persistent economic vulnerabilities, which are fossil fuels and inaction to control our waterways with flooding. Leading experts agree a faster transition to clean energy will lead to more stable energy economies worldwide. Combating these clear and present danger of climate change for our national security and of the world is imperative. It must happen. The Inflation Reduction Act has the power to spur deflationary clean energy projects, improve health outcomes, create millions upon millions of jobs, while creating savings for all Americans. But substantially, more needs to be done for frontline communities. Frontline communities are those that experience hardship resulting from climate change. Frontline communities like Allen Park. The northern end of my community is on what is known part of the Ecorse Creek watershed. It's an area that was once part of an even greater Lake Erie. Ecorse Creek watershed and the river nearby is necessary to sustain the local economy. The creek is relatively urban and filled with what can only be described as easy fixes and band-aids. That area is sustained to flooding. The capacity of most of the drains isn't sufficient, and we must handle a few ways with new peak flows. Watersheds are needed, but they are needed to affect water quality, provide great benefits to communities, wildlife. They provide vital nutrient cycling, carbon storage, biodiversity, recreation, and so much more. In 2019, during a once-in-a-generation storm in my community, a quarter of my city partially flooded. It was a sight that just ached at your heart. Pictures and precious memories that once sat, flood damage took over. People were displaced. Homes were damaged. Some of them unrepairable, just to be ready to be raised. Insurance rates rose. Normal weekly public services were pushed and pushed back. The damage and anguish that I saw in my neighbor's eyes and the eyes of her daughter, Lisa, after she lost her outdoor playhouse that she played in daily. The blind stare of my friend Joe after he told me the damage of his Pride 67 convertible Mustang was beyond repair. And if you're a Michigan person, you know how important cars are. It was devastating. The fabric of my community was forever changed and tattered. Even though I already filed to run for office, I knew then there was a higher power that wanted me to run. I wanted for my family, my neighbors, my community, my city of Allen Park. Yeah, local communities cannot alone bear the burden. Communities like Allen Park, you shouldn't need an ark to live in Allen Park. President John F. Kennedy once said, the supreme reality of our time is the vulnerability of our planet. Therefore, as a leader of the free world, the president must not stop or settle just for the Inflation Reduction Act. President Biden needs to go further, much further. Further to the point of declaring a climate emergency. Thank you.
Please.
Yeah, I just had one saying, Brown, just listening to this, like we were just joking that, you know, these 100-year storms are now seem like it's coming every year. It's no longer, they're no longer 100-year storms, but now they're, because I think we've seen major flooding almost every year in the last 4 or 5 years on these coastal communities.
Yeah, sadly, I mean, billion-dollar storms, or at least 20 of them last year.
Yeah.
How often can you even say $1 million storm or every generational storm when it happens every year? Like, oh, I guess we have to come up with a new acronym to make it.
Which is the unfortunate reality. What's happening is as a threat multiplier that climate change is creating. So thank you everyone here for the really thoughtful, wonderful, and impactful remarks. We're going to take some questions. I'll take some from the audience here, and then we have the chat from the online crew in front of me here. So I'll try to alternate between the two with the time we have remaining. And since you are the very first to just put your head straight up, if you can come a little bit to the center if possible, and then ask your question. And
yeah, hi, I'm Teddy Gray King. I'm the mayor of Piedmont, California, which is in the beautiful Bay Area. One thing I want to say is we are a relatively small community in a big dynamic environment, and you would think that would make it easier to access funding from the state and federal levels for our infrastructure projects, but we find it really hard. We're sort of overshadowed by our neighbors, San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose. Yet we could have such a great impact. Can you share with us your thoughts on how can we band together so that communities of various sizes, not just the big cities, can access critical infrastructure projects to make our own cities and municipalities, counties more have availability for the funding that's going to come through the pipe? Thank you.
I jumped on that. Town of Dumfries is 1.6 square miles. I just secured funding for a $180 million infrastructure project.
Bravo.
It's a project. So as a mayor's elected official, one of the key things, and I know it's hard for, especially if you're not a full-time mayor, if you're part-time, but quite frankly, it's relationships, right? You have to be able to show up and get into certain rooms where the conversations is being had. I think Hamilton had a song, the room where it happens, right, in Hamilton. So you just got to be in the rooms where it happened. You know, I sat on the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, which just happened to be in the room, and without a vote, was able to make sure all the other 9 members understood why I needed a vote. And so where the infrastructure projects that you need are happening, you need to be in the room.
Good advice.
I can add to that. I felt with California,
Yes.
you know, we at the Yurok tribe, we beat the doors down. You know, we take trips. We'll spend days, put miles on my step. The other part of that is we also have a great staff. We have a staff that we've assembled together, and they go after, you know, tooth and nail for these monies. You know, here at the Yurok tribe, you know, they've helped our water infrastructure. We have rural areas where we have people that don't have water at all. And so we've been able to get $15 million to start the first phase of our $60 million water project. We've also done, we're working on broadband grants. We have areas of our community that don't have access to internet. If you can imagine that, no internet, kids can't go to school during COVID-19. Our kids weren't. So we have a staff that goes after those monies, and we support them the best that we can.
And if you don't have a staff, get with your municipal league or even your national league of city who has a bigger staff. Become members of those organizations, and you almost have somebody to lobby, and they'll bring those infrastructure projects.
And
with
check
you.
in with the EOPA too, so we can connect the lawmakers across the US and allow them to share best practices.
Absolutely.
The other thing, we got a comment in the chat here. I believe a hub has been launched recently to help smaller towns and cities with accelerating federal infrastructure funding, and the link is in there, so we'll share that as well. So, great, so let's take another question, ma'am.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for the presentation. I'm Naila Alam, council member for the town of Herndon. I'm just giving you one of the insight, which is global, you know, because originally I'm from Pakistan, and for a couple of weeks there has been a lot of rain in Karachi, Pakistan. It has drawn so many buildings and cars and homes, and I think this is because of the global warming, and I just wanted to share my thoughts about it. Thank you for giving me the chance.
Yeah.
For the invite. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Sir.
I'm David Wilcox. I lead a global network that searches the planet for scale and solutions that actually achieve what you're trying to do at scale. I would ask just quickly by raise of hands, are any of you using carbon credit funding to get your match funding? Okay, that's what I expected. So there's a huge opportunity that if we don't take advantage of it, will become a disaster. It's going to force, so far 1,000 global corporations have committed to be net zero, and every single one of them will have to come and get carbon credits to even get close. And the carbon credit market is horrific, horribly organized. And the assumption is that it all goes south of the equator because the projects have to not be fundable without the credits. So both of you who mentioned that you have projects that need match funding, that's a critical criteria. So I would suggest we put together a task force, so to speak, and see if we can capture some of those dollars. And thank you for letting me
Great.
share.
Well, let's look forward to continuing that conversation at the DOE as well. We have another question here that's a little bit more generic for members in the panel here, but how will the IRA help Native Americans?
Yes, I would like to. Certainly,
I'll let you go first.
Yes, and I want to also say my grandfather's Yurok, so I know Quinault, Yurok family, a very small community. Yes, with respect to the IRA and how it's going to help tribal nations, as my relative said, it's difficult for our tribes to even access, to have the capacity to begin to undertake the work. And the investment that we're going to see through this act, this critical piece of legislation, we see it as it is historic, but really it's a down payment for what we need to accomplish in the future. And this is going to help us with capacity. It's going to help us not only achieve the goals that we have in our adaptation and mitigation strategies, but to even begin to understand the climate crisis that's facing each and every tribal nation. Quinault, my tribe has been working on climate change for decades, and our scientists have called our council for an SOS meeting. They said our science cannot keep pace with the multiplying and exponential impacts of climate change to really understand how it's affecting our communities. And so we need to try to even just use these dollars just to do the problem assessment, because before we can even do adaptation and mitigation strategies, we have to know what the challenges are. And there are many, and they're multiplying each and every year as science modeling, as my colleague here said, the pace is outpacing even conservative modeling over the years. And so tribal nations are trying to do that. So those are some of the key things that's going to help with us, with our salmon recovery efforts, with relocating our villages to higher ground. We have 2 villages in my nation that have to move their entire village to higher ground because of sea level rise. The place where my ancestors signed the treaties are now underwater. Our glaciers are melting, the Anderson glaciers that feeds the mighty Quinault. We had millions of salmon in the 50s and 60s. The year I got elected, we only had 3,000. And so all of the efforts that we've undertaken, we're now going to have the resources to begin to implement those adaptation and mitigation strategies, as well as enlist these resources to do additional trying to assess the current state of the crises. Thank you for the question.
I could add
Please.
to piggyback off some of her comments. You know, here at the Yurok tribe, we have a world-class fisheries program. We've already been doing salmon restoration work to allow our salmon to recover from the gold mining that's been done. They have ravaged their habitat. We've already been doing the work. The IRA will help us continue this work that we've already been doing. Also, we're looking at forestry management with cultural fire, as I mentioned in my speech. That would also give us the funding to continue that work, because right now our habitat is not habitable for the deer and the elk and all the animals because of the timber companies' mismanagement. That would give us the funding to implement these things on our land. And we also do carbon sequestration already, but we've already committed those funds to purchasing our land back. We've made investments to regain our ancestral territory. Also, we've also invested in forestry management practices with equipment and giving our people jobs. That is where this is going to be a big part of it, is giving our tribal members jobs, but we don't have right now. The opportunity to buy a home, opportunity to have a stable car, to be able to go to the grocery store and not have to worry about how much money is in your bank account. Those are the things that is going to help us as Yurok people.
Thank you. We have a question from online, Representative Eisenhart. Is EOPA developing relationships with national stakeholders to work at the state level to identify and advocate for how state funding can and should be used to combine with and leverage funding through the Inflation Reduction Act? So the short answer is yes, sir. We're absolutely here to support that. And that's actually one of the purposes of why we're bringing together local, state, and federal lawmakers along with the administration and climate leaders, so we can leverage that. So looking forward to continuing the conversation there. We had a question up here, I think I indicated. Sir.
Hello, my name is Warren Hawk. I sit on the tribal council for the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. And I just want to let you know we're in the room.
Yes.
And in light of No DAPL, he has really pushed for renewable energy. So this bill is really important to us, and that it would hopefully help us in our renewable energy projects, which is the reason we're here. And I just wanted to let you know that if you really want to talk about renewable energy and sustaining our environment, you need to be having conversations with our people. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to highlight, there's a really innovative wind energy project happening at Standing Rock, where the proceeds and everything will really go to help the local community. So.
And if I could really quickly, there's a feature in the IRA which funds greenbacks. A lot of the answers at the local level can be found through the green bank process. The one that sticks in my mind is the one we just tried to get legislation passed in Virginia for a residential property assessed clean energy program, whereby you have an assessment to your property, and that assessment is equal to whatever they need to invest in your property to make it more energy sufficient and sustainable. This has a direct impact on lower income families that are generally in lower quality homes that have more energy leakage. They can do an energy audit. They can make it dramatically reduce utility bills for those kinds of families. That kind of funding can come from a green bank. The other thing about local communities is find out what your comparative advantage is as a local community. What do you have uniquely in your local community or in a collective of local communities that will give you some throw weight at the state and federal level so you can begin to have some leverage in those discussions. And then think outside the box. Loudoun County, somebody told me the other day, why are we building more gas stations in Loudoun County? Let's just stop building gas stations. Well, you got to balance that with what you can actually get done. That clearly is probably not going to survive. But it got me to thinking what we can do is change the local ordinance in Loudoun County so that if you want to build a gas station, you can. You have to provide as many high-speed electric vehicle charging stations as you have gas pumps. You have 9 gas pumps, you got to have 9 high-speed stations. You figure it out. It's a capitalist market. You figure out how you're going to make a profit at that. All I'm telling you is if you're going to build a gas station in Loudoun County, you got to provide electric vehicle charging stations. So we can do that. The state doesn't have to give us permission to do that. We can do that. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
So we have 5 minutes left and a few questions, actually more questions. So let's see if we can do this very quickly. All right. Igor, I think you were first and then gentleman to the left. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Good morning. I'm Igor Treguk, retired Berkeley Land Stabilization Board Commissioner and a native of Kiev, Ukraine. So I really resonate with your comments about how together this is the IRA Climate Emergency Declaration is a very important step forward to divest from what funds Putin's war machine, $258 million a day in oil alone, and instead invest in a democratized renewable energy supply. My question is this. In California, we just installed a 1.5 million rooftop solar system. That's 12 gigawatts of distributed, renewable, affordable energy. But in California, at the same time as the IRA would provide a historic 40% investment tax credit on solar, there's a proposal at the Public Utilities Commission to tax distributed generation, detrimentally impacting working and middle-class families and communities in particular. For those of you in different states, what advice do you have on how to ensure that our states in their policy levers are not working at cross purposes with what the federal government and the Biden administration are doing? Thank you.
Anyone want to jump into that one? The tough one. It kind of actually, it goes along with an interesting security related question we got online where just from being a former state representative, it's challenging because the other side has a strategy to go state by state and put what they call sun taxes in motion. And they were actually successful in Nevada at one point, put a $50 tax on rooftop solar, which is kind of ironic considering that population base doesn't like taxes, so to speak. So fortunately, that was reversed by the Nevada legislature. But this is an example of a strategy that is being put in place by the oil and gas industry to delay what's happening here. And the question here was very much on the security angle of how are what we're doing at the local, state, federal, national, and international level can help us be more secure. And every rooftop solar in California and every place across the US adds to our energy security, and it aggregately adds up. Now, the neat thing is because Putin and other autocratic nations, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, right, they're so desperately single source funded by oil and gas, what happens when we're off it? It's actually an existential threat to them that we get off oil and gas, and that helps democracies across the world. So there are many double benefits to this. And I believe the supervisor here had an experience in Africa working with General Clark, where he saw this firsthand.
Yeah, when I was on the Joint Staff, my last assignment in the Air Force, my boss was Wesley Clark, who was the NATO commander. And I met him some years later, at 2014, 2015, at a cocktail party right here in Washington. And I asked him at the time, I said, and this was 5, 7, 8 years ago, what the number one security threat in the world was today. He looked right in the eye and said, Ukraine. And the reason is because there's a perceived dependence. If there's a perceived dependence, then there is a de facto insecurity. There's a that it makes an insecure environment if one party is dependent on another party extensively. And if that has been, if anything has been shown to be true, it's that in the war in Ukraine. Look at the dependence that Europe has on oil from Russia. And that entire conflict has been fueled, no pun intended, by the oil shortage and by the dependence of Europe on what Russia has to give. The answer with the oil and gas industry, I maintain going forward, and I don't know how to do this, but I don't know, we are being held back as an anchor when we try to compete with their interests in Congress and with all the legislative bodies throughout the world, frankly. This is an existential threat for them that we can come off of fossil fuel. Somehow we have to turn the corner by making it profitable for them to make the transition. I don't know how to do that, but that's how we have to be. We have to bring them into the sustainable field somehow. Their fuel prices are going up. Sustainable energy fuel prices are going down. That's just economic reality. We have to bring them over into that economic paradigm if we're going to ever make them allies rather than enemies. I'm not sure how to do that, but again, if there's a perceived dependence, then there is by definition de facto insecurity.
And unfortunately, it goes with water and energy together. Across the world, 50 million people are displaced. This is the highest it's ever been in modern history, displaced due to conflict, right? It's double what it was 10 years ago. So when you have big migrations of individuals and folks struggling, that creates instability too. So there's a lot here to work on. It's directly impacting people's lives. Now we have a lot of questions, and we can go 3 minutes over, and that's it, because we've got to get to the DOE. So if gentlemen could come to the front, please. 30 seconds. We'll try to do a 30-second back, and then we'll get it out.
I'll go quick. My name is Alex Burton. I represent the City Council in Evansville, Indiana. I'm so grateful to put this on, for you all to put this on. And my question to you all is, how do we, as a nation and a world, assist communities like mine who are under the umbrella of an energy company where they're the monopoly? There is no solar, there is no wind, there's no other options. And of course, in the state of Indiana, there are no incentives, if you will, for us as a state to pursue wind or pursue solar. And so we're in this space where all the incentives, as you mentioned, are getting taxed. So yes, someone may have a solar on their roof, but they're getting fees just like the rest of the residents who are paying about, on average, $156 increase from year over year from the regulatory commission. So that's where we are as a community, and looking for guidance from anyone who may have something.
Go ahead, please. Virginia just allowed community choice aggregation at the local level. What that means is, if Loudoun County wants to do it, we can go out and find a third-party aggregator who finds sustainable energy and offers Loudoun County residents a choice between Dominion's fossil fuel energy and sustainable energy off the Northeast grid. The trick is, you got to get your state to say you as a locality can do that. And so that's where the partnership with the state, and I know that's a challenge, but that's where it's got to come from. You've got to be empowered to be able to come up with options. And if they won't empower you to do that, then that's a tough one, but I'd keep plugging away at it.
And so we're going to go to the next question really quickly.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I'm a renewable energy developer who focuses on battery energy storage and solar. In the IRA that passed, one of the, I don't want to call it secret, but one of the hidden provisions makes it highly incentivized for nonprofit pensions and endowments to invest in renewable infrastructure. In fact, they are more incentivized than PE firms in New York. Go to your local teachers, firemen, police, universities. They don't even know that they have a new incentive program, which will make them the best investor out there. Make them build local for you, because I'm telling you, they don't even know this yet. But if you want solar, wind, or storage in your communities, make your own people invest in it. It'll be good for them.
Oh, thank you.
Really
So we're going to round it out now. And it's a really good segue into one of the questions we got online to round it out is, how does the IRA help an initiative, individual, community, or in your own district or community? So we can just go down the line and about 15 seconds on it.
Sure. In New Mexico, more money for infrastructure, especially transmission lines and for renewable energies, because we have fossil fuel, but we have renewables coming. So that's what will help ours.
It'll help tribal nations by aligning everything that we do consistent with our traditional values of sustainability that will help empower and uplift us to once again reconcile with our past and our ancestral teachings.
Energy storage, data center community is really looking at stabilized grid energy storage, and there's a feature of that in the IRA that's I think is going to be really powerful.
Great.
As I mentioned before, we have rural communities that have no electricity. So it's a blank canvas. So we're going to be able to create microgrids to serve our elders and an underserved community that has never had power before with sustainable energy.
Reconnecting a body of water to a historic community for us, being able to really take advantage of that combined with the Build Back Better America, it's a tremendous opportunity for us to take huge opportunities in a lot of those projects.
As I said, I live in Allen Park, which is 20 minutes from Detroit, so I really will put the fire under the suppliers and of the big three and suppliers themselves to really push for green jobs and incentivize their workers to invest in green technologies at their plants and show that it is a reality that there are more than one ways to make an engine or whatever component in vehicles or machinery that's needed in our economy. Obviously, that is not going to go away anytime soon. So let's make them fit and better and more efficient.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. We really appreciate your support. We will head to the Department of Energy next and continue the conversation.